An old man finds a wounded K9 German Shepherd puppy and becomes his father for a lifetime. What happens when a lonely old man stumbles upon a broken soul in the form of a wounded K9 German Shepherd puppy? This is not just a story about rescue. It's about two hearts that were lost, finding each other in the most unexpected way. Tonight, you'll witness how a bond forged in pain grew into something powerful, unshakable, and eternal. Get ready for a journey of resilience, loyalty, and love that proves family can be found in the most surprising places. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another inspiring story about courage, loyalty, and second chances. Harold Whitmore was 72 years old, a retired mechanic living alone in a quiet town on the edge of Pennsylvania. His wife had passed away years earlier, and his children lived scattered across different states, calling only on holidays. The days had become slow and repetitive: coffee at dawn, a walk with his cane through the wooded path behind his house, and then long afternoons filled with silence. He was used to the quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that pressed on his chest, reminding him how empty the house really was. That particular morning was colder than usual, with the wind biting through Harold's worn jacket as he stepped onto the forest trail. The autumn leaves crunched under his shoes, and the sky was painted in shades of gray. He walked slowly, careful with each step, leaning on his cane. It was supposed to be just another walk, just another day of trying to fill the hours. But fate had other plans. At first, he heard nothing, just the whistle of the wind and the occasional crow. Then, faintly, a whimper. Harold froze. It was soft but sharp, a sound that pierced through the forest. He turned his head, trying to locate it. Another whimper, this time followed by a low, pained yelp. His heart jumped. He wasn't sure if it was a wild animal or something else, but his instincts pulled him forward. Pushing past fallen branches, Harold followed the sound until he reached a small clearing near a pile of rocks. That's when he saw him, a tiny German Shepherd puppy, no older than 3 months, lying on his side. The pup's fur was matted with dirt, one paw bent unnaturally, and his breathing was ragged. A collar still clung to his neck, scratched and worn, with faint letters that suggested he wasn't just any dog. Harold's eyes widened when he read the faint engraving, K9 Unit Training Facility. The old man knelt as much as his knees allowed, lowering himself slowly until he was close to the pup. The puppy growled weakly, baring tiny teeth in a show of defiance despite his condition. Harold's throat tightened. "Easy there, boy," he whispered, his voice trembling yet gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you. Looks like the world's already done enough of that." The pup's body trembled, but when Harold extended his hand carefully, palm open, the small creature sniffed the air. The old man could see the fear in those brown eyes, but beneath it was something else, something desperate, clinging to life. Harold took off his jacket, draping it carefully over the pup before lifting him with both arms. The dog let out another pained whimper but didn't fight. In that moment, something inside Harold cracked open, something he hadn't felt in years. He felt needed. The walk back home was harder with the extra weight, but Harold held the pup close, whispering to him with each step. "Hang in there, little fella. We're gonna get you fixed up. You're not alone anymore." When they finally reached the house, Harold placed the puppy gently on an old blanket near the fireplace. He grabbed a bowl of water, holding it carefully to the pup's mouth. At first, the German Shepherd refused, but then his tongue flicked out, taking cautious sips. Relief washed over Harold as he saw the small creature drink. The old man's hands shook as he examined the injured paw. He wasn't a vet, but he could tell it was badly hurt. Still, he knew one thing: he wouldn't abandon him. Not now. Not ever. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Matthews, the local veterinarian he hadn't spoken to in years. "Doc, it's Harold," he said, his voice urgent. "I found a puppy. He's in bad shape. Can you come over?" The vet hesitated. "Harold, I usually don't do house calls anymore, you know that." "This one's different," Harold interrupted, his tone firm. "He's a K9 pup. Somebody left him for dead. Please." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "All right, Harold. I'll be there soon." While waiting, Harold stayed by the pup's side, stroking his fur gently. "You've got fight in you, don't you? I can see it. Reminds me of myself, back when life knocked me down more times than I can count." The puppy's eyes blinked slowly, his breathing steadying as if he could sense the sincerity in the old man's words. When Dr. Matthews arrived, carrying his worn leather bag, he knelt beside the pup with a practiced eye. "Broken paw. Dehydrated. Exhausted. He's lucky you found him, Harold. Another night out there and..." He trailed off. Harold looked down at the tiny creature, now wrapped in his jacket, and shook his head. "I don't believe in luck, document. I think he was meant to be found." The vet cleaned the wound, set the paw, and gave the pup a small injection to ease his pain. The whole time, Harold never left his side, his hand resting protectively near the pup's head. When the vet finally stood, he said, "He'll need time, care, and patience. But he's strong. He'll make it." Harold nodded firmly. "Then he's staying with me." Dr. Matthews raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Raising a working dog isn't easy. Especially one from a K9 line. They're bred for toughness, discipline. This little guy's got a fight in him." Harold smiled faintly, his eyes softening as he looked at the pup. "So do I." That night, as the fire crackled, Harold sat in his old armchair with the puppy curled up on the blanket beside him. He could hear the soft rhythm of the pup's breathing, fragile yet determined. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. But deep in Harold's heart, a question lingered. If this pup truly came from a K9 unit, why was he left to die in the woods? And what secrets did his past carry that could change both their lives forever? The first nights were the hardest. Harold, though old and tired, found himself waking every couple of hours to check on the little German shepherd curled up on the blanket. Each time he leaned forward to listen, he feared the shallow rise and fall of the puppy's chest might stop. But the pup always kept fighting, breath after breath, proving that survival was etched into his bones. By the third day, the puppy had a name. Harold sat in his chair, staring into the glowing embers of the fireplace, when the pup let out a small bark, sharp, determined despite his bandaged paw. Harold chuckled softly. "Courage," he said aloud, as if the word had chosen itself. "That's what you are, boy. You've got courage." From then on, the house no longer belonged only to Harold. Courage limped after him on his 3 good legs, dragging his tiny frame across the hardwood floors. He chewed on Harold's slippers, barked at his reflection in the old mirror, and whined when Harold left the room. The old man, once surrounded by silence, now found himself smiling at the sound of tiny paws tapping along the floorboards. Still, not everyone saw the joy in Harold's newfound companion. On the 4th morning, Harold walked into town with Courage tucked carefully in a carrier. He needed supplies, puppy food, medicine, and maybe a toy or two. At the small general store, whispers began the moment he walked in. "That's one of those K9 dogs," a man muttered near the counter. "They're bred for the police. Dangerous if you don't know how to handle them." Another voice chimed in. "What's an old man like Harold doing with a dog like that? He won't last a month." Harold heard every word, but he kept his chin steady. He approached the counter, placing a bag of puppy kibble and a rope toy in front of the cashier. "He's not dangerous," Harold said, his voice calm but firm. "He's just a pup who needs a chance." The cashier, a young woman named Emily who had always been kind to Harold, smiled warmly. "Every dog deserves a home," she said as she scanned the items. She leaned over to peek at the carrier where Courage's brown eyes shone back at her. "And he looks lucky to have found you." Harold nodded but said little. Deep down, doubt gnawed at him. Could he really raise a K9 bred dog, one that was destined for the intense discipline of law enforcement? He was just an old man, long past his prime. That evening, Harold sat on the porch, Courage resting on his lap. The wind carried the smell of rain, and the trees whispered in the distance. "They think I can't do it," Harold said quietly, scratching behind Courage's ear. "Maybe they're right. But you and me will prove them wrong." The rain came suddenly, heavy and relentless. Harold hurried inside with Courage, but the storm shook the house with thunder that rattled the windows. Courage whimpered, pressing himself against Harold's leg. The old man bent down, pulling the trembling pup into his arms. "Easy boy. I'm here. Nothing's gonna hurt you." For the first time in years, Harold felt a responsibility that gave his life meaning. This tiny creature depended on him, not just for food and shelter, but for comfort, safety, and a future. The following days tested that promise. Courage's paw healed slowly, but his energy grew rapidly. He darted around the small house, bumping into furniture, gnawing at chair legs, and barking at the vacuum cleaner. Harold, who had lived in order and silence for so long, struggled to keep up. More than once, he thought about whether he had made a mistake. One afternoon, Courage slipped out the back door when Harold forgot to latch it. Panic surged through Harold's chest as he saw the pup limping toward the woods. He dropped his cane and stumbled forward, calling out desperately, "Courage! Come back, boy!" The little shepherd stopped at the edge of the trees, looking back with ears perked. For a moment, Harold feared the pup would disappear into the forest. But then Courage turned around and bounded clumsily back into Harold's arms, tail wagging furiously. The old man sank to the ground, clutching him tightly. His eyes stung as he whispered, "Don't ever scare me like that again. You're all I've got now." But that night, Harold's doubts deepened when Dr. Matthews visited for a follow-up. The vet studied the pup carefully, nodding as he examined the healing paw. "He's strong. He'll grow into a fine dog. But Harold, are you sure you're up for this? He's not just any puppy. Once he's older, his instincts will kick in. Training, exercise, discipline, you'll need all of that. And let's be honest, you're not a young man anymore." Harold bristled. "I know what I'm taking on, document. I may be old, but I'm not useless." The vet softened his tone. "I don't doubt you, Harold. But I've seen these dogs. They demand more than most people can give. Just be prepared." When the vet left, Harold sat alone in his chair, staring at the fire. Courage slept soundly nearby, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Harold's thoughts churned with the words he'd heard: dangerous, too much, can't handle it. Yet as the night deepened, Courage stirred in his sleep and pressed his head against Harold's worn boot. The old man reached down, running his fingers through the pup's fur. In that moment, the doubts faded. He didn't see a future police dog. He didn't see a challenge too great. He saw a companion, a reason to get up each morning, a heartbeat in a house that had been silent for far too long. Still, the world outside was not done testing them. Rumors of a missing K9 puppy from a training facility had begun to circulate in town. And if what Harold suspected was true, someone might come looking. For now, though, it was just him and Courage, two souls patched together by fate. But their fragile beginning was about to collide with forces beyond Harold's control. The weeks slipped by, and the rhythm of Harold's life changed in ways he never expected. Mornings once defined by quiet coffee were now filled with the sounds of paws scratching at the back door and barks that echoed down the narrow hallway. Courage's paw had healed enough that he no longer limped, though he still carried a faint stiffness when the weather turned cold. He was growing quickly, too quickly for Harold's liking. What had once been a fragile bundle wrapped in a jacket was now a strong young shepherd with sharp eyes and boundless energy. The bond between them was undeniable. Harold found himself speaking to Courage as though he were a son. "You remind me of myself when I was young," Harold said one morning, pouring kibble into a metal bowl. "Headstrong. Always running toward something without knowing what it was." Courage barked once, his ears perking, as if he understood. But while Harold's home had filled with warmth, the outside world was beginning to stir with questions. One crisp afternoon, Harold stopped by the post office to collect his mail. The postmaster, an older woman named Linda, leaned over the counter and lowered her voice. "Harold, have you heard? They say a K9 pup went missing from the training facility over in Harrisburg. The officers have been searching for weeks. Word is, they think someone might have stolen him." Harold stiffened, gripping his cane tighter. "Stolen?" he echoed, his voice carefully neutral. Linda shrugged. "That's the rumor. They're offering a reward too. If someone's hiding him, they'll be in serious trouble once the truth comes out." The words followed Harold all the way home, clinging to him like shadows. When he opened the door, Courage bounded toward him, tail wagging, his eyes filled with trust. Harold knelt slowly, letting the pup's tongue brush against his wrinkled hands. His chest tightened. Was this the same dog they were searching for? The same pup trained to serve but left broken in the woods? That night, Harold sat in his chair, staring into the fire. His conscience waged war against his heart. The right thing, perhaps, was to call the facility and report what he had found. But when he imagined strangers arriving to take Courage away, a cold dread settled in his stomach. The thought of the house falling silent again, of losing the only heartbeat that filled the rooms with life, it was unbearable. Courage must have sensed the storm brewing inside him, for he padded over and rested his head on Harold's knee. His eyes, deep brown and unflinching, seemed to ask a question without words. "Will you abandon me too?" Harold bent forward, stroking his fur. "No, boy," he whispered. "Not while I've got breath in me. You're mine now." But destiny had a way of testing promises. A few days later, Harold was walking Courage through town, the pup trotting proudly by his side. They passed the diner where townsfolk often gathered, and whispers rippled like wildfire. "That's him," a man muttered. "Looks just like the one from the posters." Harold kept walking, pretending not to hear. But his pace quickened, his grip on the leash firm. Courage, oblivious to the stares, barked happily at a passing car. When they reached the edge of town, Harold finally allowed himself to breathe. He crouched down, his voice low and urgent. "We have to be careful, Courage. They don't understand. They'll take you away from me." As if to answer, Courage pressed his nose against Harold's cheek, his tail wagging softly. The gesture, so small yet filled with trust, made Harold's eyes sting. That evening, Harold's phone rang. He almost didn't answer, but the voice on the other end froze his blood. It was Dr. Matthews. "Harold," the vet began, hesitant. "I thought you should know, the authorities came by today. They asked if I'd treated a young German Shepherd recently. I didn't say anything, but they'll be back. They're serious about finding that pup." Harold's throat went dry. "And if they find out?" There was a long pause. "You could face charges," Matthews said finally. "Harboring stolen property, interference with law enforcement. I'm telling you this as a friend. Be careful." After hanging up, Harold sat in silence. The fire had burned low, casting the room in shadows. Courage lay beside him, chewing gently on the rope toy Harold had bought weeks earlier. Each playful tug, each bark, each glance felt like a plea, "Don't let them take me." That night, sleep eluded him. Memories of his younger days flooded back. The times he had failed to protect those he loved, the nights he had wished for a second chance. And here it was, right in front of him, in the form of a dog who had already suffered too much. The next morning, Harold made a decision. He wouldn't hide Courage away like a criminal, nor would he surrender him to a future of harsh training that might break his spirit. Instead, he would train him himself, not as a K-9 officer, but as family. He began with small lessons in the yard. "Sit," Harold said, his voice steady. Courage cocked his head but eventually lowered himself onto his haunches. "Good boy," Harold praised, slipping him a piece of leftover chicken. Each day, the bond grew stronger. Each command learned was not about obedience but about trust. But even as progress bloomed, danger loomed closer. A black SUV rolled slowly through town that week, men inside asking questions, flashing badges. They stopped at the diner, the hardware store, even Linda's post office. By the time Harold heard of it, his decision was clear. He couldn't let them find Courage, not yet. Not until he proved that the pup was more than property, more than a missing number in their records. He was family. As the sun set that night, Harold watched Courage chase the last rays of light across the yard, his paws strong, his spirit unbroken. A smile tugged at Harold's lips, though his heart beat heavy with fear. The world was closing in on them. And somewhere deep inside, Harold knew that sooner or later, he would have to face the truth about Courage's past. Harold had grown used to living with a quiet hum of worry in his chest, but by the end of that week, it had turned into a drumbeat. Every creak of the porch, every sound of a car slowing on the road outside, every shadow moving across his window at night, it all made him tense. Courage, too, seemed to feel it. His ears pricked at strange noises, his young body stiff whenever footsteps approached the house. On a cold Friday afternoon, the inevitable happened. Harold was stirring a pot of soup when a loud knock rattled the front door. Courage jumped to his feet, barking with such ferocity that Harold's heart nearly stopped. The knock came again, 3 firm pounds that carried authority. Harold hobbled toward the door, his cane tapping across the wood floor. When he opened it, 2 men stood on his porch. Both wore dark coats, their badges glinting faintly in the gray light. One was tall with a hard jawline, the other younger, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Whitmore?" the taller one asked. "Yes," Harold replied, his voice steady though his stomach nodded. "I'm Officer Reynolds, and this is Agent Clark," the man said. "We're investigating the disappearance of a German Shepherd pup from the Harrisburg K9 training facility. We've had reports that a dog matching the description was seen around town. Mind if we come in?" Behind Harold, Courage growled, low and protective, his small body planted firmly between the men and his guardian. Harold placed a trembling hand on the pup's back. "He's just a dog I found in the woods," Harold said, his tone carefully measured. "Half dead and abandoned. If you want to call that missing property, maybe you ought to ask why he was left out there to die." The younger agent, Clark, stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, if this is the dog, he belongs to the state. He's a specialized asset. Keeping him could be considered theft." Harold's eyes flashed. "Asset? Is that what you call him? He's a living soul, not a piece of equipment. I carried him home when no one else would. I fed him, cared for him, stayed up nights making sure he kept breathing. Where were you then?" For a moment, silence filled the porch. Courage pressed closer to Harold, his growl softening into a protective stance. Officer Reynolds exhaled slowly. "We're not here to fight, sir. We're here to bring the pup back where he belongs. If he stays with you, his training will be wasted. He was meant for service." "Maybe he was meant for more than service," Harold replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Maybe he was meant to remind an old man what it feels like to live again." The agents exchanged glances. Clark pulled out a card and placed it on the small table by the door. "Think about it, Mr. Whitmore. If you change your mind, call us. We'll be back to check in." When they left, Harold closed the door and leaned against it, his body shaking. Courage, sensing his distress, jumped up and licked his hand, tail wagging as if to reassure him. Harold sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "They'll come back," he whispered. "They won't let you go." That night, Harold dreamed of losing Courage. He saw strangers dragging him away, the pup's cries echoing into the darkness. He woke in a sweat, gasping, only to find Courage curled at his feet, sleeping peacefully. Relief washed over him, but the fear remained. The following morning, Harold made a decision. If they were going to fight for Courage, then Harold would prepare him, not as a weapon, not as property, but as a protector. He began by taking Courage into the woods. "Stay close," Harold said, his cane pressing into the dirt as they walked. Courage followed, ears alert, sniffing the ground eagerly. Harold practiced commands, simple ones: sit, stay, come. The shepherd, eager to please, learned quickly. By the second week, Courage responded with a discipline that shocked Harold. His instincts were sharp, his focus uncanny. But unlike the rigid training Harold imagined from police facilities, their sessions were built on trust and love. When Courage succeeded, Harold's voice brimmed with pride. When he stumbled, Harold knelt and comforted him, never harsh, never cruel. Yet the tension in town was growing. Rumors swirled that the authorities would be returning soon, this time with paperwork and perhaps even force. Neighbors whispered behind Harold's back. Some pitied him, some called him selfish, others said he was breaking the law. One evening, Harold stopped by the diner for a cup of coffee. A man at the counter sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero, keeping that dog? He belongs to the force. You're robbing him of his destiny." Harold turned, his eyes cold. Destiny isn't decided by paperwork. It's decided by love. He walked out before the man could reply. When Harold got home, Courage was waiting by the door, wagging his tail. The sight filled Harold with strength. He crouched, his knees aching, and stroked the pup's fur. "They don't understand, boy. But we'll show them. You're not theirs. You're mine. But deep down, Harold knew the storm was closing in. He could feel it in the way strangers lingered outside his property, in the way cars slowed near his house at night. The world was demanding Courage back, and Harold was just one old man standing in the way. One night, a noise shattered the uneasy calm, a car pulling into his driveway well past midnight. Harold's heart pounded as headlights cut across his window. Courage leapt to his feet, barking furiously, the sound fierce enough to rattle the glass. Harold grabbed his cane, his body trembling but his resolve unbroken. Whoever was out there, whatever they wanted, they would have to go through him first. The front door creaked, and the shadow of a figure appeared outside. Courage's growls deepened, his young frame bristling with protective fire. Harold's voice rang out, steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "Who's there?" The figure at the door wasn't an intruder, nor a thief. It was Officer Reynolds, the same man who had stood on Harold's porch days earlier. But this time, his hat was in his hand, his expression not hardened by duty but softened by something Harold hadn't expected: hesitation. "I know it's late," Reynolds said, his voice quieter than before. "But I needed to come." Harold kept one hand on his cane and the other steadying Courage, who barked furiously at the visitor. "What do you want now?" Harold asked, his tone sharp. "If you've come to take him, you'll have to drag me out first." Reynolds shook his head. "No. I came to talk." Against his better judgment, Harold opened the door and let him step inside. The fire still burned in the hearth, casting the room in a golden glow. Courage stood pressed against Harold's leg, his body tense, his eyes locked on the officer. Reynolds sat down slowly, his gaze falling on the pup. "You don't know the whole story, Mr. Whitmore. The puppy, Courage, you call him, he was part of an experimental litter. They were training them too young, too hard, pushing them beyond what their bodies could handle. He broke his paw during a drill. Instead of giving him care, some higher-up decided he was a lost cause. They dumped him, abandoned him like trash." Harold's stomach churned, his fists tightening. He looked down at Courage, who tilted his head as if listening, as if he understood the cruelty in the words. "So you're telling me they threw him away because he wasn't perfect?" Harold's voice cracked with rage. "Because he got hurt?" Reynolds nodded grimly. "I didn't know until later. By then he was gone. And when I heard rumors that an old man had found him, I came hoping it was true. I just needed to see him alive." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire and Courage's steady breathing. Harold bent down, wrapping his arms around the pup's growing frame. His voice trembled, but his words were iron. "He's not going anywhere. Not back to them. Not after what they did." Reynolds met his eyes and, to Harold's surprise, nodded. "I won't take him. Not after hearing this. But you should know, there are still people who'll come looking. They don't like leaving loose ends." Harold swallowed hard, his throat burning. "Then let them come. They'll find out this dog has a home. And a father." The officer stood, sliding his hat back on. At the door he paused. "Take care of him, Harold. He was meant for service, but maybe the service he was meant for is you." When Reynolds left, Harold locked the door, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and hope. He turned to Courage, who wagged his tail and pressed his nose against Harold's wrinkled hand. Tears filled the old man's eyes as he whispered, "Looks like you were meant for me all along, boy." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were full. Courage grew into a powerful, loyal German shepherd, his body strong and his instincts sharp. Yet beneath all his strength, his heart remained tender toward the man who had saved him. Neighbors who once whispered began to smile when they saw Harold walking through town, Courage trotting proudly at his side. Children ran to pet him, and even the skeptics admitted that the old man had accomplished something remarkable. Courage wasn't a failed police dog. He was a protector, a companion, and in every way that mattered, Harold's son. Harold's days no longer dragged with silence. Each morning, Courage's bark was his alarm, his invitation to greet the sunrise together. Each night, the shepherd curled at his feet, a warm reminder that love could return to a house once empty. One winter evening, Harold sat by the fire, Courage resting with his great head in his lap. The old man's hand stroked the dog's fur slowly, and his heart swelled with gratitude. "I thought my life was over," Harold murmured. "But then you came. You gave me purpose again." Courage lifted his head, meeting his eyes with a look that spoke without words. "And you gave me a family." Tears slipped down Harold's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. He realized then that family wasn't about blood, or age, or expectations. Family was about choosing each other, standing together when the world tried to tear you apart. The house, once heavy with silence, now pulsed with life. Courage had filled the void, but more than that, he had healed the broken places in Harold's heart. The old man had become a father again, not by chance, but by choice. And though Harold knew time was fragile, that every year mattered more than the last, he also knew that the bond between them would outlive even the ticking of the clock. Because some loves are eternal, written not in years but in the spaces they transform. As the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, Harold whispered the words he had carried from the very first night. "You're not alone anymore." Courage licked his hand, and in that simple gesture, Harold understood the truth. He had saved the pup's life, yes, but in return, the pup had saved his.